The wind whipped through the valley like a warning, carrying with it the scent of earth, dust, and something faintly metallic. From a distance, the hills appeared calm, even serene. But beneath that quiet surface, a storm of struggle had been quietly unfolding. No one had dared to venture here for years, not since the fire, not since the drought, and certainly not after the rumors that all the horses were gone. "There's nothing left," the locals had said. "They didn't survive." But she didn't believe them. Celia had always had a way of seeing beyond the obvious, of trusting her instincts even when the world told her to look away. A seasoned caretaker, she had spent decades rescuing neglected or abandoned horses, often returning from missions with her heart both heavy and full. This time, she was drawn to a remote valley where rumor and rumor alone had left a void in the imagination of the townspeople. Her truck groaned as it bumped along the rugged trail, tires skidding over loose stones, dust rising in clouds behind her. In the back, the smell of hay and leather mingled with the lingering hint of her own determination. She hadn't been here in years, not since her own horse, Blaze, had passed, a loyal companion that had taught her everything she knew about patience, trust, and understanding the quiet language of a horse's eyes. Blaze's absence left a subtle ache in her chest, one she carried with her everywhere. Yet in that ache was a spark, a drive to not let another creature suffer, to honor the memory of every horse that had taught her how to love without conditions. The sun had just begun to dip below the ridge, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, when she saw them. At first, it was a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between boulders. Then another and another. Her breath caught. 12 horses. 12 terrified, starving, wild horses scattered across the scarred landscape, each fighting to survive. They were a vision both heart-wrenching and awe-inspiring. Ribs visible beneath dusty coats, eyes wide with fear, nostrils flaring with every cautious sniff of the wind, they were shadows of their former selves. Yet even in their weakened state, they radiated a raw, untamed beauty that made her chest tighten. Celia stepped out of her truck slowly, heart pounding, hands trembling just slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of what she was about to face. These horses weren't just wild. They were wary, conditioned by months of isolation, danger, and hunger. Approaching them carelessly could trigger panic, maybe even a stampede. And yet, the sight of them, so alive against the odds, made her pulse surge with purpose. She crouched behind a boulder, pulling out her binoculars. Each horse had its own story etched into its eyes and scars. One was smaller, probably a yearling, trembling as it tried to keep pace with an older, dominant mare. Another had a limp, a silent testament to a brush with injury or perhaps a fight for territory. Her stomach churned with a mixture of horror and empathy. She could see that every day, every moment had been a fight. And they had survived, not by luck, but by sheer will. As twilight deepened, the herd began to move, slowly, cautiously, always alert to the slightest sound. Celia followed at a distance, careful to keep the vehicles and her presence hidden. She whispered to herself, almost as if speaking aloud might startle them. "It's okay. I see you. You're not alone anymore." Her voice was a lifeline, fragile, but earnest. Suddenly, a shout broke the tense silence. One of the horses reared violently, kicking out at an imagined threat. Celia froze. She realized how close she had come without noticing. Her heart thudded as adrenaline surged. This was why no one had dared to return. These horses weren't just surviving, they were defending themselves against every shadow, every noise, every human that had let them down in the past. She knew she had to be patient. She remembered Blaze, how he had taught her that trust was earned slowly, moment by moment. She took out a small bag of oats from her pack, shaking it gently. A few horses glanced in her direction, their ears flicking, nostrils flaring. They didn't approach, not yet, but curiosity had pierced the wall of fear around them. Night fell swiftly, blanketing the valley in an almost unnatural darkness. Celia set up a small camp at the edge of a ridge, out of sight, but close enough to observe. As she ate a hasty dinner, she kept her eyes on the flickering silhouettes below. One by one, she noted each horse, their positions, movements, apparent injuries, and temperament. She began mentally mapping out a plan: how to provide food, water, and medical attention without causing panic, how to gain their trust, how to turn this scattered, fearful group into a herd that could survive, and maybe even thrive, again. But the valley was deceptive. What seemed like a safe clearing could conceal a hidden ravine. A shallow stream could conceal deep, treacherous waters. Celia felt the tension coiling in her chest. The survival of these 12 horses would not just be a test of her skills. It would be a test of her courage, patience, and resolve. And somehow, even amidst the fear and the unknown, she felt a thrill. This was what she was born to do. Just before sleep took her, she heard a soft whinny, almost lost in the wind. She froze, listening. Another whinny followed, softer this time, almost hesitant. She smiled, heart swelling. They were watching her. They knew she was there. Not friends yet. Not safe. But aware. A connection, however tenuous, had been formed. In the distance, stars sparkled over the valley, indifferent to the struggles below, but Celia felt a spark of hope. Tomorrow she would take her first steps to help them. But tonight she simply watched, heart in her throat, amazed that life had survived here in the harshest of conditions. 12 fragile lives, battered but unbroken, clinging to hope in a world that had written them off. And she vowed silently, fiercely, as the wind whispered through the rocks and the trees, "I won't let you down. Not now. Not ever." Little did she know, the challenges awaiting her would push every limit: her endurance, her patience, and her heart. Some horses would resist, some would flee, and some secrets hidden in this valley would test the bond she was desperate to form. But for now, the story had begun. A story of survival, trust, and the unbreakable connection between human and horse. Celia leaned back against the ridge, eyes wide, watching the shadows move, whispering softly, 12 lives. 12 miracles. Let's see what we can do. Dawn arrived with a fragile light, filtering through the jagged peaks like a promise. Celia was already awake, cold coffee in hand, heart racing with anticipation. The night had been restless. Dreams of panicked hooves and terrified eyes haunted her sleep. She knew that the hardest part was about to begin, making contact with 12 horses who had learned only one rule: trust no one. She packed lightly, taking only what she absolutely needed: a small feed bag, a brush, some water, and her journal. Every detail mattered, every movement counted. One false step, one careless noise, and the fragile wall of curiosity she had glimpsed the night before could crumble instantly. The valley was quiet, deceptively so. She slipped along the ridge, moving like a shadow, and finally spotted them. The herd was grazing near a small, muddy creek, wary but alive. Their eyes darted constantly, ears flicking at every sound. Some were still thin, ribs protruding beneath sun-bleached coats, while others bore the marks of fights, bruises, scrapes, and scars that told a story of constant struggle. Celia knelt behind a boulder, whispering softly, more to steady herself than to calm them. "It's okay. It's me. No harm. Just food." She carefully scattered some oats along a path that would lead toward her. A small mare, slightly larger than the others, approached first, nose twitching, eyes wide. Her hooves dug into the soft earth, hesitant. Celia held her breath. The mare paused, as if sensing the danger and trusting, then slowly stepped forward, grabbing a few oats before retreating back to the safety of the herd. One by one, other horses began inching closer, drawn by hunger but restrained by instinct. Yet even as they ate, their bodies were tense, every muscle coiled, ready to bolt at the slightest hint of threat. Celia's hands shook slightly, heart thumping. She whispered encouragements, "That's it, easy, good girl." She realized that for these horses, food wasn't just sustenance, it was a test. And every cautious bite was a tiny victory of trust. Hours passed like this, a slow dance of approach and retreat. Celia moved only when the horses allowed it, never forcing proximity. The sun climbed higher, warming the valley, but the tension remained taut, unbroken. Then, suddenly, disaster struck. A young stallion, lean, fiery, full of raw energy, spotted a shadow moving along the rocks. With a terrifying snort, he reared, knocking over the small bag of oats in a cascade. The mare bolted, followed by the other horses in a stampede of fear. Celia froze, heart in her throat, powerless as 12 lives scattered across the valley. Her stomach sank. This was the risk she had feared. Years of experience told her she had just pushed too fast, that trust could not be forced. She closed her eyes, whispering apologies, feeling the weight of each panicked hoofbeat echo through her chest. But then something remarkable happened. The young stallion paused at the edge of a boulder, nostrils flaring, eyes bright with defiance. Not fleeing entirely, not yet. The herd had scattered, but he stayed, watching her, testing, calculating. Celia's heart surged. This was her first real connection. She stayed low, arms extended slightly, letting him see she meant no harm. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her pocket for a handful of oats, letting them drop a few feet from her. The stallion watched, muscles tense, and after a long, excruciating moment, he took a tentative step forward, and then another. His teeth grazed the grain, then he bolted again, but returned. Over and over he approached and retreated, a pattern that mirrored the fragile trust forming between them. Celia felt tears prick at her eyes. It was exhausting, frustrating, terrifying, but also miraculous. She whispered softly, her voice barely audible, "I see you. I know you're scared. I won't hurt you." By midday, some of the herd had begun to regroup around the stallion, drawn by the tentative safety of numbers. Celia took advantage of this, carefully moving closer, scattering oats, and speaking softly. A smaller mare allowed her to approach within 10 feet, lowering her head to nibble directly from Celia's hand. A victory so small yet so profound that her chest swelled with relief and awe. Yet, despite these victories, the valley remained unpredictable. Rocks shifted beneath her feet, and she narrowly avoided startling another horse. One of the older mares hissed and kicked, reminding her that this herd was still dangerous, still wild, still fighting for survival. Celia's palms were raw, her voice hoarse, but she pressed on. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridge, painting the valley in deep amber, a quiet settled among the horses. Some had eaten, some had sniffed at her, some had remained at a cautious distance, but every single horse was aware of her presence now. A line had been drawn. They weren't friends yet, but the first step had been taken. Celia sank to the ground, exhausted, knees in the dust. Her hands shook, her body ached, but her heart was full. 12 horses, 12 miracles, each with a story, each with a past, and each inching ever closer to hope. She knew the work ahead would be grueling. Trust would have to be earned, not demanded. There would be injuries, scares, and moments where she might question whether she had the strength to continue. Some horses would test her limits, some would resist violently, and others would surprise her with flashes of connection she hadn't thought possible. Yet for the first time in this valley, a fragile thread had been woven between human and horse. A thread of possibility. And Celia whispered, more to herself than to the horses, "Tomorrow we go further. We begin the real work." Little did she know, the valley held secrets far beyond hunger and fear. Some horses carried memories of trauma that ran deeper than physical scars. Some were leaders, some were loners, and some had grudges that could erupt at any moment. Navigating this fragile ecosystem of survival, trust, and raw instinct would challenge every skill she had, and push her to the very edge of her endurance and heart. But for now, as the sun sank behind the peaks, casting long shadows over the weary herd, Celia allowed herself a small smile. A stallion nuzzled the mare she had fed, and she realized that even in the midst of fear, life had found a way to endure. And she thought quietly with awe, "We're just getting started." The next morning arrived like a fragile promise, a soft glow spilling over the valley, painting the horses' coats in gold. Celia rose with the sun, muscles sore but resolve stronger than ever. Yesterday had been a test of patience, today would be a test of courage. Every step she took in this valley demanded respect, for the land, for the horses, and for the fragile thread of trust they had begun to form. She approached the herd slowly, this time with a deeper awareness of their personalities. The fiery stallion, now named Ash in her mind, watched her with keen intelligence. He had survived months of isolation and fear, and every instinct told him to flee. Yet yesterday he had shown curiosity, and that curiosity was the first crack in his armor. The smaller mare, timid but resilient, allowed Celia to approach closer than any other. Each horse presented a different challenge, some defiant, some cautious, some resigned to the harshness of life in the valley. Celia carried a small water trough this morning, knowing they were dangerously dehydrated. She set it carefully in a clearing, then knelt nearby, keeping herself low and her movements deliberate. The horses approached cautiously, sniffing the water, measuring her intent. One of the older mares pawed at the ground, a silent warning, while Ash circled at the edge, tense but watchful. Hours passed in silent observation, broken only by the soft clink of water and the occasional whinny of the herd. Celia felt every beat of their hearts as if it were her own. She scattered small handfuls of oats, speaking softly, never forcing contact, never making sudden movements. Slowly, painstakingly, a rhythm developed. A rhythm of tentative trust, retreat, and cautious engagement. Then came the first real breakthrough. The young mare, whose coat had once been dull and patchy, stepped forward and nuzzled her palm. The gesture was small but monumental, a declaration of a fragile bond. Celia's heart soared, tears welling as she whispered encouragements. One by one, the other horses began to approach, drawn by the safety of numbers and the gentle consistency of her presence. Even Ash, after hours of circling, finally lowered his head, grazing oats from her hand without flinching. It was a victory, but it was fragile. The valley held its own dangers. As Celia guided a mare back toward the clearing to inspect an old injury on her leg, a sudden gust of wind sent a cascade of loose rocks tumbling down a nearby slope. The startled horses reared, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Celia froze, heart hammering, as she realized one of the younger foals had slipped, scrambling on the loose soil. Without thinking, she lunged, catching the foal just before it tumbled into a shallow ravine. Her hands scraped against rocks, blood mingling with dust, but she didn't care. The foal trembled in her arms, and she whispered soothingly, rocking it gently. The other horses watched from a safe distance, eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "That's it, it's okay," she murmured, her voice shaking. "You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." The foal's trust, so quickly placed in her hands, felt like a sacred bond. Celia realized that moments like these were more than physical rescue. They were the beginning of emotional connection, the moment when fear began to yield to hope. Hours later, as the sun climbed high, Celia took a moment to sit and catch her breath. Her body was exhausted, but her spirit was alight. She thought of Blaze, her old horse, and the lessons they had shared about patience, observation, and empathy. Blaze had taught her that every horse carried a story, every scar had meaning, and every gesture of trust, no matter how small, was monumental. But the valley held secrets that went beyond scars and hunger. Celia began to notice subtle behaviors, horses glancing at unseen threats, ears swiveling toward rustling brush, tails twitching at shadows. Something was lurking in the edges of the valley. A predator? Or perhaps another human who had ventured too close before? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she had to remain vigilant, not just for the horses, but for herself. As dusk fell, Celia set up a temporary corral using portable fencing, creating a safe space for the herd to rest. Some horses reluctantly entered, eyes scanning constantly, muscles coiled for flight. Others lingered just outside, unwilling to give up freedom entirely. Celia felt the tension in the air like a living thing. It was a delicate balance, freedom versus safety, fear versus trust, and she was at the center, trying to guide them without forcing their choice. Then came an unexpected twist. One of the older stallions, previously unseen, emerged from the shadows. His coat was matted, one eye clouded, and he radiated authority and caution. The herd stiffened immediately. Ash snorted, stepping protectively in front of the mares and foals. Celia's stomach tightened. She realized that this horse had been the silent ruler of the valley, the one who had maintained order and survival while humans were absent. Any misstep, any hint of disrespect, could trigger a fight that might leave injuries, or worse. Celia remained low, arms extended slightly, and spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to help." The older stallion studied her for what felt like an eternity, then slowly, deliberately, lowered his head and approached the corral. He sniffed cautiously, then nuzzled a foal. Celia exhaled, relief flooding her. The unspoken message was clear: she had been accepted, at least tentatively, by the valley's most dominant presence. That night, as she sat by the fire, she reflected on the fragile progress. 12 horses, each with its own fears, scars, and instincts, were beginning to trust her. She had survived minor injuries, the stress of navigating unknown terrain, and the unpredictability of the herd. And yet, she knew the valley still held deeper challenges: storms, hidden predators, and perhaps even human threats from poachers or land developers. She pulled out her journal and wrote, hand trembling with exhaustion and emotion. "Today, they let me in. One step at a time. I've earned their curiosity, their tentative trust. Ash, the mare, the foals, even the old stallion. But tomorrow is another day, and I must be ready for anything. I feel their lives in my hands, their trust fragile, their hope fragile, but alive." Celia's reflection was interrupted by a soft nicker from the corral. She looked up to see Ash and the younger mare standing near the firelight, watching her as if sharing the quiet pride and relief she felt. In that moment, she realized the truth she had always known: rescue was more than feeding and healing. Rescue was connection, empathy, and respect. And trust, once given, was the most precious gift of all. Little did she know, the coming days would test her limits like never before. Some horses would test her patience. Others would test her courage. And one of them, a horse she hadn't yet seen, held a secret that could change everything. If she could reach it, if she could break through the layers of fear, trauma, and survival instinct. But for now, as the valley settled under a blanket of stars, Celia allowed herself a small, rare moment of peace. She whispered softly, almost to herself, almost to the horses, "We're building something here, something stronger than fear. Something worth fighting for." And in that quiet, suspended night, 12 hearts and one human heart beat together, fragile, wary, but beginning to believe in hope again. The morning air was thick with mist, curling around the valley like a whisper of warning. Celia awoke before sunrise, the chill in her bones a reminder that this remote wilderness demanded respect, endurance, and vigilance. The herd had begun to settle into a fragile rhythm. Ash and the mare were now approachable, the foals slightly more trusting, and even the older stallion had accepted her presence. But today, something felt different. A tension crackled in the air, invisible but undeniable, a warning that the valley's fragile peace could shatter at any moment. As she made her way toward the clearing, Celia noticed subtle signs of unrest. The older stallion was pawing violently at the ground, ears flat, nostrils flaring. Ash snorted sharply, signaling alarm, and the mares tightened together, foals pressed close. Celia's stomach dropped. Something had spooked them, and whatever it was, it could trigger chaos. Suddenly, the foal that had been saved just 2 days ago darted toward a steep ravine, startled by a sudden rustling of bushes. Celia ran, heart pounding, sliding down the slope to catch the trembling creature. Loose stones tumbled beneath her boots, her palms scraped against jagged rocks, but she held firm. The foal pressed against her chest, trembling violently, eyes wide with fear. She whispered soothingly, feeling the raw intensity of trust being tested for the first time. One wrong move and the delicate connection she had fought so hard to build could shatter. When she finally brought the foal back to safety, the rest of the herd had frozen near the creek, tails swishing nervously, muscles taut. She noticed Ash circling, protective but uncertain, and the older stallion had taken a defensive stance on higher ground, nostrils flaring, teeth bared. This was the first time the herd's survival instincts fully collided with her presence. Celia's mind raced. She knew that patience alone wouldn't be enough. She had to show calm authority, careful judgment, and unwavering consistency. One wrong gesture could ignite a stampede or provoke a fight that could leave injuries. But she also knew that fear could be transformed into trust with the right approach. She lowered herself to the ground, avoiding direct eye contact, and began speaking softly, slowly, deliberately. "It's okay, it's just me. I won't hurt you. Nothing will happen." Her voice, calm but firm, carried across the misty valley, cutting through the tension like a lifeline. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, as if testing her words, Ash stepped forward cautiously, nose twitching, then backed away. The older stallion watched intently, ears swiveling, eyes sharp. The mare nudged a foal forward, a gesture of tentative reassurance. And then, slowly, miraculously, the rest of the herd began to settle, their trust fragile but present. Celia exhaled, relief washing over her, but the valley wasn't done testing them. By midday, storm clouds rolled over the peaks, dark and menacing. The first raindrops fell, spattering on dust and rock. The horses panicked, flinching at every crack of distant thunder. The foals huddled together, tremors of fear running through them. Celia knew she had to act fast. She guided them toward the temporary corral she had set up, keeping her voice soft and calm, but her movements decisive. The older stallion initially resisted, eyes flashing, but Ash stepped in, nudging the mares and foals along. The rain intensified, turning the ground into a slick, treacherous mixture of mud and stones. Celia's boots slipped as she tried to herd the last reluctant horses, mud soaking her clothes, sweat and rain blending together. But she pressed on, driven by a combination of fear, empathy, and determination. A sudden cry shattered the tense rhythm. A younger mare had slipped into a hidden ditch, struggling to climb out. Celia didn't hesitate. She plunged into the mud, gripping the mare's harness, pulling with every ounce of strength, heart hammering in her chest. The horse thrashed, eyes wide with panic, and Celia felt the full weight of responsibility. One mistake, and a life could be lost. Finally, with a final heave, the mare was free. She trembled, soaked and exhausted, but alive. Celia held her close, whispering reassurances, tears mingling with rain. Around them, the rest of the herd had calmed slightly, watching silently as the bond between human and horse proved itself in the crucible of danger. Exhausted, she finally collapsed near the corral, shivering but triumphant. The herd had survived the storm, and the fragile trust she had begun to build had held under pressure. But there was another challenge waiting, one she hadn't anticipated. One of the mares, smaller and more cautious than the others, suddenly froze, ears flat, and backed away. Celia followed her gaze to the far edge of the valley, where a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, unknown, unannounced, and moving with intent, watched them. Panic surged through the herd. Ash snorted, foals huddled, and the older stallion bristled. Celia's pulse raced. She didn't know if the stranger meant harm, but she instinctively knew that any confrontation could undo all the trust she had painstakingly built. She stepped forward, arms raised, voice steady, commanding attention. "Stop. I'm here. Don't come closer." The stranger hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. Relief and fear collided in Celia's chest. The valley had tested her with nature, with the unpredictability of wild horses, and now with the unknown intentions of humans. But she held firm. She would protect this herd at all costs. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the valley drenched and glistening under the moonlight. Celia lit a small fire, warming herself while the herd settled near the corral. She studied each horse, their coats matted, their eyes wary but softening, their trust fragile but present. She realized that despite every danger, every challenge, the bond she had begun to form was unbreakable in its significance. As she lay down, exhausted and soaked, Celia reflected on the journey so far. The storm, the stampedes, the dangers lurking in the shadows, they had tested her, terrified her, and yet had strengthened the connection with the herd. 12 horses, once abandoned, now looked at her not as a threat but as a source of safety, hope, and guidance. She whispered softly to herself, a promise and a prayer. "We've survived the storm. Together." And no matter what comes next, we will endure. You are not alone. Not anymore. Above, the stars shimmered through thinning clouds, a silent witness to the trials of the day. And as she closed her eyes, she knew the final chapter was approaching, one of healing, trust, and the culmination of an extraordinary journey that had started with 12 fragile lives fighting to survive. The morning after the storm broke like a miracle. Sunlight poured over the valley, glinting off wet coats and sparkling in puddles, illuminating the herd in a way that made Celia catch her breath. The rain had washed away the dust, but it had also revealed something more profound. 12 horses, battered but alive, standing together as if the valley itself had conspired to give them a second chance. Celia moved carefully, boots still muddy, arms aching, but heart soaring. Yesterday had been a trial by fire, or rather, by rain and fear, and every horse had survived. Now it was time to cement the fragile bonds she had nurtured. Ash, the young stallion, stepped forward as she approached, nostrils flaring, eyes intelligent and bright. The mare that had first nuzzled her palm yesterday came too, foals huddled close, curious and trusting in a way they had never been before. Even the older stallion, who had ruled the valley with quiet authority, lowered his head in acknowledgement. For the first time, Celia felt the full weight of what she had accomplished. These were no longer just wild, frightened horses. They were a herd, and she was part of it. She knelt, scattering oats, allowing the horses to approach at their own pace. One by one, they stepped forward, tentative but steady. Celia spoke softly, feeling each word resonate with trust and empathy. "You've made it. You're safe. You belong here, and I'll be here for you." The valley seemed to breathe with her, the wind whispering through the trees, the sunlight warming the damp earth, and the horses responding in kind. The foals pranced a little, Ash nudged her gently, and the mare leaned into her touch. Tears welled in her eyes, not of exhaustion this time, but of awe. This was the moment she had fought for, the culmination of every scrape, every fearful encounter, every heartbeat spent earning trust. But the journey wasn't just about survival. Celia knew these horses had suffered more than hunger and storms. Each scar, each wary glance, told a story of abandonment and trauma. And she felt it in her chest, a profound empathy that made her even more determined to give them a life worth living. She pulled a soft blanket from her pack and wrapped the smallest foal, brushing its wet coat, whispering reassurances. The foal relaxed completely, trusting her entirely for the first time. By midday, Celia had led the herd to a safe, lush meadow she had scouted earlier. Fresh water, soft grass, and wide open space awaited them, a sanctuary. The horses explored cautiously at first, sniffing the ground, nudging each other, then gradually relaxing. Ash pranced around the meadow, muscles rippling, eyes shining. The older stallion followed more deliberately, keeping a watchful eye on the herd but moving with the first hints of ease. Celia took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of the moment. She had entered a valley where no one dared to tread, discovered 12 lives clinging to survival, and forged bonds where fear had once ruled. But the most profound revelation wasn't the survival, it was the trust she had been given, fragile but absolute, from creatures who had every reason to fear humans. The sun began to dip, golden light streaming across the valley. Celia sat on a rock, watching the herd graze and play. Ash nuzzled her shoulder gently, and the foals pranced around, tails flicking in joy. Even the wary mare ventured closer, standing beside her as if sharing in a silent acknowledgement of their journey. She pulled out her journal, writing with hands still trembling. Today, 12 lives began anew. Fear is still here, but so is trust. Hope is here. And I've learned that survival is not enough. Connection, love, patience, and respect are what truly save lives. They've given me their hearts, and I will guard them forever. Celia looked up at the valley, the horses moving freely in the golden light. She whispered softly, knowing the cameras and audience weren't needed for this moment. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are loved. And together, we are stronger than fear. It was then that a small group of local volunteers, alerted by Celia's earlier messages, arrived quietly at the edge of the meadow. They had come to help, bringing supplies, medical kits, and fresh food. The herd watched them cautiously, but Celia stepped forward, arms wide, speaking softly. "They're here to help. You're safe." One by one, the volunteers gained the horses' trust, guided by Celia's steady presence. The scene was heart-stopping. Ash allowed a gentle pat on his neck, Foal's nuzzled hands, and the older stallion watched calmly, now fully accepting the human presence. Celia's heart swelled. The impossible had been achieved. The valley, once a symbol of loss, fear, and abandonment, had become a sanctuary. 12 horses, once fighting for survival, were now thriving, surrounded by care, trust, and hope. As the volunteers settled in, Celia took a step back, letting the horses move freely, letting nature and trust dictate the pace. She allowed herself a rare smile, tears streaming freely, because this wasn't just a rescue, it was a transformation. From fear to trust, from abandonment to belonging, from survival to thriving. That evening, under the setting sun, Celia walked among the horses, gently brushing their wet coats, speaking softly to each of them. Ash nuzzled her, a quiet promise of loyalty. The foals pranced happily, the maras relaxed, and even the older stallion lingered nearby, his presence calm and dignified. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, storms, injuries, the need for ongoing care, but in that golden light, with 12 hearts beating in unison with her own, she understood the power of patience, empathy, and unwavering dedication. As the stars emerged over the valley, Celia whispered one final vow, a promise to the horses and to herself. No one is ever truly lost. Not if someone is willing to see, to care, and to never give up. You fought to survive, and together, we will thrive. The camera pans over the herd, now relaxed, grazing peacefully, a scene of resilience, beauty, and connection. Celia watches from the edge of the meadow, a smile on her face, tears in her eyes. A soft voiceover concludes. Sometimes, hope is found in the most forgotten places. And sometimes, it takes a heart brave enough to see it to bring it back to life. If you believe in second chances, in courage, in the unbreakable bond between humans and horses, share this story and help others see the power of trust and love. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us why we never give up. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with the warmth of hope restored, the awe of nature's resilience, and the unforgettable connection between Celia and her herd of 12 miraculous survivors.